abandoned and betrayed. He waited until his last breath. But his owner regretted it bitterly. The rain poured relentlessly over the empty street, drenching the frail body of a dog curled up near an old rusted gate. His fur, once golden and full of life, was now matted and caked in mud. His eyes, dim yet filled with undying hope, scanned the distance. He waited. Days turned into nights, hunger gnawed at his stomach, and his once wagging tail barely twitched. Yet he did not move. He stayed where he had been left, believing, praying, that the one he loved the most would return. His name was Bruno. Bruno had once been the pride of his owner, Mark, a man who had once called him family. But as time passed, Mark's life changed. New responsibilities, a new relationship, and eventually a new home. There was no room for Bruno in that new life. One fateful evening, Mark drove Bruno far from home and left him by the roadside with nothing but an old, familiar blanket. "You'll be okay, buddy," Mark had murmured before stepping into his car, guilt already gnawing at him. But Bruno wasn't okay. He chased the car until his legs gave out, barking desperately for his owner to stop. When he couldn't run anymore, he limped back to the spot where he was abandoned and waited. Weeks passed. The kind-hearted locals tried to help, but Bruno refused food from strangers. He only wanted the one who had left him. His body weakened and his breaths became labored, but still he waited. One day Mark stumbled upon a post online. A picture of a dying dog curled up in the rain, captioned, "He still waits for the one who left him." His heart pounded as he recognized Bruno's eyes, now lifeless and dull. Regret surged through him like a tidal wave. Without hesitation, he drove to the location. But he was too late. Bruno lay motionless, his body finally giving up after weeks of loyalty and hope. His once loving heart had stopped beating, still waiting for the man who never returned. Tears streamed down Mark's face as he fell to his knees beside his best friend. He whispered apologies that would never be heard, his chest tightening with unbearable grief. He had abandoned Bruno, but Bruno had never abandoned him. And that regret would haunt him forever. The night was cold, the wind howling through the empty streets as rain drizzled down in a relentless whisper. A lone figure lay curled up near the rusted gate of an abandoned building, his golden fur now reduced to a patchy, filthy mess. His ribs pressed against his frail skin, his breath shallow and weak. His name was Bruno. Once he had been full of life. Once he had been cherished. He remembered the days when his owner, Mark, would throw a ball across their backyard, laughing as Bruno dashed after it, his tail wagging wildly. He remembered the warmth of Mark's touch, the soft pats on his head, the whispered words of affection. But all of that had become nothing more than distant memories. Memories that had turned into a painful ache in his heart. Bruno had not always been a stray. No, he had once belonged to someone. Someone he had loved more than anything in the world. Someone who had promised to always be there. But promises were fragile things. The day everything changed. Mark had once adored Bruno. When he had first brought the puppy home, he had sworn to protect him, to love him, to care for him no matter what. And for years he had kept that promise. But as time passed, things changed. Mark's life became busier. He found love, met someone who didn't quite understand why he devoted so much attention to a mere dog. Slowly, Bruno became less of a priority. Walks became shorter, playtime less frequent, and affectionate pats turned into hurried gestures of obligation. And then, one fateful evening, everything fell apart. Mark packed his bags. He was moving to a new apartment with his fiancée, where pets weren't allowed. He had convinced himself that Bruno would be fine without him, that leaving him at a shelter or finding him a new home would be too much trouble. So he made a decision. One evening, he loaded Bruno into his car and drove far away from the city, far from everything familiar. The dog sat in the passenger seat, his tail wagging, his eyes full of excitement. He thought they were going on another adventure. But the adventure ended too soon. Mark pulled over near an abandoned lot, his hands trembling as he unbuckled Bruno's leash. He avoided his dog's trusting gaze as he set down a small old blanket, the same blanket Bruno had used since he was a puppy. "Stay here, buddy," Mark mumbled, standing up. Bruno tilted his head, confused. And then, before he could react, Mark turned and walked back to the car. Bruno barked a sharp, desperate cry. His paws scraped against the pavement as he ran after the vehicle, his heart pounding in panic. He chased after the car with all the strength he had, his legs burning as he tried to catch up. But he was no match for the speed of the engine. The red taillights faded into the distance, leaving only darkness. Bruno stood there, panting, his chest rising and falling heavily. He whimpered, confused, his eyes darting around as if trying to find an answer to why his owner had left him behind. Then, slowly, he turned back. He walked back to the blanket Mark had left him with and curled up on it, his body trembling. And he waited. Endless wait. Days turned into nights. Bruno remained there, his eyes locked onto the road, waiting for the car to return. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he refused to leave. Thirst burned his throat, but he stayed. Passers-by tried to offer him food, but he barely touched it. The world moved on around him, but Bruno did not. The once healthy dog began to wither. His fur became dull, his body weak. The cold rain soaked through his thin coat, his small body shivering violently. Yet, even as his strength faded, he never moved from that spot. Hope was a cruel thing. And then one night his body could take no more. He collapsed onto the blanket, his breaths shallow, his eyes fluttering shut. He could still see Mark's face in his mind. He could still hear his voice, still feel the warmth of his hands. Even in his final moments, he believed Mark would come back. But Mark never did. Regret that came too late. Miles away, Mark scrolled through social media, sipping his coffee. Life had moved on for him. His new home was comfortable, his future bright. But then his fingers froze. A post had appeared on his feed. A picture of a thin, frail dog curled up on a blanket in the rain. The caption read, "He still waits for the one who left him." Mark's heart stopped. He recognized that blanket. He recognized those sorrowful eyes. His stomach twisted into knots, an unbearable guilt washing over him. He felt sick, his hands trembling as he grabbed his car keys and rushed out the door. The drive felt endless. He reached the spot, his headlights illuminating the same place where he had left Bruno. But Bruno was no longer waiting. He lay there, motionless, his tiny body still curled up on the blanket. The rain dripped from his matted fur, his chest rising no more. Mark fell to his knees, his breath catching in his throat. Tears streamed down his face as he reached out, his hands shaking as they touched Bruno's cold, lifeless body. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." But apologies meant nothing now. He had left Bruno behind, thinking the dog would move on. But Bruno had not moved on. He had stayed, believing that his owner would return. And in the end he had died waiting. Mark buried his face in his hands, the weight of his guilt crushing him. Some mistakes could never be undone. Some wounds could never be healed. And no matter how much he regretted it, the one soul who had loved him unconditionally was gone. Forever. The rain continued to fall, soaking the lifeless body of the dog who had once been full of life, love, and loyalty. His golden fur, now matted with dirt and rainwater, clung to his frail body. His ribs protruded through his skin, a testament to the weeks of suffering he had endured. Mark knelt beside him, his hands shaking as he reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the damp fur. The warmth that had once filled Bruno's body was gone, cold, lifeless. The realization hit Mark like a freight train. The dog who had once been his best friend, the one who had trusted him more than anyone in the world, was gone. And it was his fault. A sharp, gut-wrenching sob escaped Mark's throat as he pulled Bruno's limp body into his arms, cradling him like he had when he was just a puppy. Tears mixed with the rain as he rocked back and forth, whispering words that would never reach the ears of the one who had waited for him until his last breath. "I'm sorry," he choked. "I'm so sorry." But apologies were meaningless now. Bruno was gone. The dog who had once jumped on him in excitement. The one who had waited at the door every day for him to come home. The one who had never given up on him, even after being abandoned, was gone forever. And Mark would never be able to take back what he had done. The burden of guilt. For hours Mark sat there in the rain, unmoving. People passed by, watching from a distance, some whispering among themselves. Someone must have called the local animal rescue because soon, a volunteer approached cautiously, holding a plastic sheet and a small shovel. "Sir," the woman spoke gently, kneeling beside him. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Mark didn't respond. He didn't even look up. The woman hesitated before continuing. "We saw the post online. People tried to help him, but he refused to leave. He wouldn't eat much. He just waited. He waited for you." Her voice cracked at the last part. Mark clenched his jaw, fresh tears slipping down his cheeks. His entire body ached with the weight of regret. He had thought Bruno would move on, that he would find another home, another family. But Bruno had never wanted another family. He had only ever wanted Mark. And he had died waiting for the man who had betrayed him. The woman placed a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder. "Would you like us to help bury him?" Mark slowly shook his head. "No. I'll do it." And so, with hands that shook with grief, Mark dug through the wet soil. His mind filled with every memory of Bruno. The first time he had brought him home as a tiny puppy. His eyes filled with trust. The countless nights they had spent together. Bruno curled up at his feet, listening to his heartbeat. The way his tail would wag uncontrollably whenever Mark walked through the door. And then, the last time he had seen those eyes, full of confusion, fear, and heartbreak, as he drove away, leaving him behind. Mark swallowed the lump in his throat as he placed Bruno into the shallow grave, wrapping him in the same old blanket he had abandoned him with. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he whispered, his voice raw. "But I hope wherever you are now, you're happy." He covered the grave with soil, his heart breaking with every handful. And when it was done, he placed a small rock at the head of the grave. Then, without a word, he stood up and walked away. But the guilt, that would never leave him. The haunting regret. Days passed, but Mark could find no peace. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Bruno's lifeless body curled up on that blanket. He heard the echoes of his own voice, telling Bruno to "Stay here, buddy," before driving away. He couldn't eat. Every bite of food reminded him of the way Bruno had starved, refusing food from strangers, waiting for the one who never came back. Everywhere he went, he saw glimpses of his old friend. A golden retriever walking happily with its owner. A pair of eyes staring up at him in his nightmares, filled with pain and betrayal. His fiancée, the one who had pressured him into getting rid of Bruno, noticed his change in behavior. "You need to move on, Mark," she said one evening, frustration lacing her voice. "It was just a dog." Just a dog. Mark felt something snap inside him. He looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly everything became clear. This woman had never loved Bruno. She had never truly understood the bond between them. And if she could be so heartless about the one soul that had given him unconditional love, then she was not the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Without another word, Mark stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door. He didn't know where he was going. All he knew was that he couldn't stay in this place, with this person, any longer. A chance at redemption. Mark drove aimlessly, his heart heavy. He found himself near the local animal shelter, where dozens of abandoned dogs waited behind cold metal bars. Dogs just like Bruno. Dogs who had been left behind by the people they trusted most. And for the first time in weeks, Mark felt something stir inside him. He couldn't bring Bruno back. But maybe, just maybe, he could make sure no other dog suffered the same fate. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside the shelter. And there, in the corner of a kennel, sat a small, trembling puppy. His eyes filled with the same sadness Bruno's had once held. Mark knelt down, his voice gentle. "Hey, buddy. I won't leave you this time." And for the first time since Bruno's death, Mark felt a sliver of hope. He would never forgive himself for what he had done. But maybe, just maybe, the sky was a dull shade of gray as Mark sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The image of Bruno's lifeless body haunted him, playing over and over in his mind like a cruel, never-ending film. He had thought that time would ease the guilt, that eventually, the weight crushing his chest would fade. But it hadn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Bruno. He saw the way his dog had waited, unwavering in his loyalty, until his body could take no more. Mark let out a shaky breath and glanced at the entrance of the animal shelter. He had come here on impulse, driven by a pain so unbearable that he needed to do something. Anything to try and make amends for what he had done. But could he? Could he ever be worthy of another dog's trust? A part of him told him to leave, to walk away and accept that he would never forgive himself. But another part, a voice deep inside him, told him he had to do something. So he took a deep breath, opened the car door and stepped inside. The shelter of forgotten souls. The smell of disinfectant and damp fur filled the air as Mark walked through the shelter. Rows of kennels lined the walls, each one holding a dog with eyes full of longing and sadness. Some barked, others whimpered, and some simply stared, their spirits already broken. Mark's heart clenched as he looked at them. Bruno had been one of them once, a dog who had only ever wanted love, yet had been discarded when he became inconvenient. A woman in a blue shelter uniform approached him, her face kind but tired. "Can I help you?" she asked. Mark hesitated for a moment before nodding. I'm looking to adopt." The words felt foreign on his tongue, but the moment he said them, something inside him settled. The woman's expression softened. "That's wonderful. Do you have any particular type of dog in mind?" Mark opened his mouth but stopped. He had no idea. I want to help," he finally said. "I don't care what breed or size. I just want to give a dog a second chance." The woman studied him for a moment before nodding. "Follow me. A new beginning." She led him through the kennels, pausing in front of a small enclosure near the back. Inside, curled up in the corner, was a tiny, trembling puppy. His fur was patchy. His ribs showed through his thin frame, and his ears drooped as if he had already given up on the world. "This little guy was found abandoned in a dumpster a few weeks ago," the woman explained softly. "He's been terrified of people ever since." Mark knelt down, his heart aching as he looked at the puppy. Big, sad eyes met his, filled with the same pain and fear he had seen in Bruno's eyes. Slowly Mark reached out a hand. The puppy flinched but didn't move away. Mark swallowed hard. He had failed Bruno. But maybe, just maybe, he could save this one. A second chance at redemption. Took time. The puppy, whom Mark named Leo, was skittish, flinching at every sudden movement. At night, he whimpered in his sleep, as if haunted by nightmares of the past. Mark understood that feeling all too well. So, he sat beside Leo's bed, whispering soothing words, just as he wished someone had done for Bruno when he was alone in the rain. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Leo began to trust him. His tail wagged tentatively when Mark walked through the door. He ate without fear, knowing he wouldn't be abandoned again. And one evening, as Mark sat on the couch, he felt a small weight press against his leg. Leo had climbed up beside him, resting his tiny head on Mark's lap. Tears stung Mark's eyes as he gently stroked the pup's soft fur. "I won't leave you," he whispered. "I swear I won't leave you." But the past never stays buried. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt a semblance of peace. But peace is a fragile thing. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone, a message popped up. An unknown number. "You're the man who abandoned that dog, aren't you?" Mark's breath hitched. His hands shook as he stared at the screen. Another message came. "You don't deserve a second chance." His stomach twisted. Someone knew. Someone knew what he had done to Bruno. Mark's heart pounded as he looked around his dimly lit apartment. The shadows seemed darker. The silence felt heavier. And then, a soft thud outside his door. Mark's pulse raced as he slowly stood up, his feet moving cautiously across the wooden floor. He reached the door, hesitated, then slowly opened it. Nothing. No one was there. But sitting on his doorstep was something that made his blood run cold. A single, mud-stained blanket. The same blanket he had left Bruno with on that rainy night. Mark staggered backward, his breath coming in short gasps, his vision blurred. His past, the guilt, the regret, was coming back to haunt him. And he had a terrible feeling that this was just the beginning. Mark's hands trembled as he stared down at the mud-stained blanket lying on his doorstep. The rain from earlier had soaked it, darkening the fabric, but there was no mistaking what it was. It was the same blanket. The same one he had left Bruno with on that fateful night. His heart pounded violently against his ribs, his breathing ragged. He scanned the dimly lit hallway outside his apartment, but there was no sign of anyone. No footsteps echoing in the distance. No rustling of clothes from someone hiding in the shadows. Just silence. A deafening, suffocating silence. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Who had left it here? Who knew? Had someone followed him? Had someone been watching him all this time? Mark swallowed hard, his throat dry. His fingers clenched into fists as an unsettling realization sank in. This wasn't just some prank. This was a message. Someone was trying to remind him of what he had done. The guilt that wouldn't die. Mark shut the door, locking it tightly. His mind was in chaos. His past had followed him here to this new life, where he had desperately tried to move on. But it wouldn't let him go. He turned, his eyes darting to the small dog curled up in the corner of the room. Leo was still fast asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm raging inside Mark's head. Mark sank to the floor, running his hands through his hair. He had thought adopting Leo would help him find redemption. That somehow, if he gave love to another dog, it would erase the sins of his past. But nothing could bring Bruno back. Nothing could erase the image of him lying lifeless in the cold. Nothing could change the fact that he had abandoned the one soul who had loved him unconditionally. And now, someone else knew what he had done. Someone who wanted to make him pay. A voice from the past. The messages kept coming. At first, it was only at night. Short, cryptic texts from an unknown number. "You don't deserve him. He waited for you. You let him die." Then the photos arrived. Blurry, grainy pictures of Bruno, curled up on the wet ground, his ribs showing, his body wasting away. Pictures Mark had never seen before. Pictures that only someone who had been there, watching, could have taken. His stomach twisted. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the images, each one a painful stab to his chest. The last one made his blood run cold. It was a picture of Bruno's grave, freshly dug up. The dirt had been disturbed. The small marker he had placed was gone. Mark's breath came in short, panicked gasps. Someone had been there. Someone had desecrated Bruno's final resting place. But why? What did they want from him? The fear takes hold. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a shadow outside his window, sent Mark into a spiral of paranoia. He started checking the locks on his doors 3, 4, 5 times a night. He barely ate. The guilt, the fear, it consumed him. Leo sensed it. The small puppy had once been timid, but now he stuck close to Mark, pressing his tiny body against him as if he could sense the darkness creeping into their home. Then one night the messages stopped. No more photos. No more cryptic words. Just silence. Mark should have felt relieved. But the silence was worse. It was the calm before the storm. The nightmare comes to life. A week passed without incident. Mark forced himself to believe it was over. Maybe it had just been some twisted prank. Maybe someone had seen the viral post about Bruno and decided to torment him for it. But then the scratching started. At first he thought it was Leo clawing at the carpet. But when he turned on the lights, Leo was asleep. The scratching was coming from outside. Mark's stomach tightened as he approached the door. The sound was faint, slow, deliberate, as if someone was dragging something sharp along the wood. His fingers hovered over the doorknob. His mind screamed at him to stop. But before he could react, a loud thud shook the door. Leo jolted awake, barking frantically. Mark stumbled backward, his breath coming in panicked gasps. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. Then silence, pure deafening silence. He stood frozen, his body rigid with fear. His phone buzzed violently on the table, the screen flashing with a new message. He hesitated before picking it up. The message was short. "Come outside." Mark's throat went dry. His hands shook as he gripped the phone. Whoever this was, they weren't just tormenting him anymore. They were here, watching, waiting, face from the past. Mark's body was on autopilot as he walked toward the door. His fingers hovered over the lock, hesitating. Then, slowly, he turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing the dimly lit hallway. Me. Or so he thought. A shadow moved in the corner. Mark's pulse skyrocketed. And then, from the darkness, a figure stepped forward. For a moment, his breath caught in his throat. The person standing in front of him was drenched from the rain, their face partially obscured by the shadows. But as they stepped into the light, Mark's blood turned to ice. It was someone he hadn't seen in years. A face from his past. Someone who had once loved Bruno just as much as he had. Someone who had never forgiven him for what he had done. The woman's eyes burned with rage as she held up something in her hands. Collar. Bruno's collar. "Did you think you could forget?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "Did you think you could just move on?" Mark's mouth went dry. He tried to speak, but no words came out. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You killed him." Mark felt the weight of her words crash over him like a tidal wave. And in that moment he knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. Mark stood frozen in the dimly lit hallway, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The woman before him, soaked from the rain, her hair clinging to her face, held Bruno's collar in her trembling fingers. The metal tag glinted under the flickering hallway light, as if mocking him. Her eyes burned with an intensity that sent a chill down Mark's spine. "Did you think you could just forget?" she whispered, stepping closer. Mark swallowed hard. "Ooh. Who are you?" The woman's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You really don't remember me, do you?" She let out a hollow laugh. "I suppose that makes sense. People like you never remember the ones they hurt." Mark's fingers clenched. He tried to rack his brain to place her face, but his thoughts were a tangled mess of fear and guilt. She took another step forward, raising the collar higher, as if forcing him to look at it. "Bruno wasn't just your dog." Her voice wavered. "I was the one who found him, you know. I was the one who stayed with him while he waited for you. Day after day, night after night, until he was too weak to stand." Mark's stomach twisted. The air around him felt suffocating. She had been there. She had watched Bruno's suffering firsthand. The realization made his skin crawl. I didn't know." His voice was barely a whisper. Her eyes flashed with fury. "Of course you didn't. You never came back. You never cared enough to see what you had done." Her breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the collar. "I buried him. I held him when he took his last breath. I was the one who stayed. Not you." Mark felt like he was going to be sick. The images of Bruno, alone, starving, waiting, swirled in his mind like a relentless storm. The woman took another step forward. "And now, you think adopting a new dog makes up for it?" Her voice dripped with venom. "You think he can replace Bruno?" Mark flinched. "No. It's not like that. I just..." He didn't know what to say. Leo whimpered from inside the apartment, his tiny frame trembling as he peeked around the corner. The woman's eyes flickered toward him, and for a moment, something in her expression changed. Pain. Longing. Then, just as quickly, the fury returned. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "You don't deserve him." Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. Before he could react, she threw Bruno's collar at his chest. It hit him with a soft clink, landing at his feet. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. The fear that wouldn't leave. Mark slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling fingers. His heart raced as he leaned against the wood, his mind spinning. Who was she? Why had she waited so long to confront him? And more importantly, what did she want from him now? He picked up Bruno's collar, running his thumb over the worn-out name tag. His vision blurred as memories of his old friend came flooding back. Leo whimpered again, crawling closer to him. Mark reached down, scooping the tiny pup into his arms. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to reassure, Leo or himself. But it wasn't okay. Because deep down, Mark knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The haunting begins. The following nights were filled with unease. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. The shadows in his apartment seemed darker. The silence seemed heavier. Then the scratching started again. Not at the door this time. The windows. The first night, he dismissed it as tree branches. The second night he double-checked, but there were no trees near his apartment. Then one night, he awoke to Leo growling at the window, his tiny body tense. Mark's breath hitched. Slowly he turned his head, and his blood ran cold. A single, smeared handprint stained the glass. Mark shot out of bed, racing to the window. But by the time he reached it, the street below was empty. No footsteps, no sounds, just the ghostly imprint of fingers against the glass. He wiped it away with a shaky hand, but the fear remained. Someone was still watching him, and they wanted him to know. A message from the grave. Days passed, but the unease never left. Then one evening a package arrived at his doorstep. No return address, no name, just a plain brown box. Mark hesitated before picking it up, his hands trembling as he unsealed the tape. Inside, buried beneath layers of old newspaper, was something that made his breath catch. A tattered, mud-streaked leash. Bruno's leash. The same one he had left with him on that rainy night. Mark staggered backward, his pulse hammering in his ears. His phone buzzed in his pocket. With shaking hands he pulled it out. A single message flashed on the screen. "You don't get to forget." Mark's breath came in ragged gasps. He looked down at Leo, who whimpered and pressed against his leg. Someone was playing a twisted game with him. And he was terrified of what would come next. The truth unraveled. Mark couldn't take it anymore. He had to find out who was behind this. He went back to the shelter, hoping to find records of who had cared for Bruno in his final days. And that's when he learned her name. Samantha Reed, a former shelter volunteer. A woman who had devoted her life to rescuing abandoned animals. And a woman whose life had been shattered by Bruno's death. Mark clenched his fists. He needed to talk to her, to make things right. But when he tried to find her, she was gone. No recent addresses, no social media activity. It was as if she had vanished. But the messages, the package, she was still out there, watching, waiting. The final warning. That night, Mark bolted awake to the sound of barking. Leo was at the door, growling. Mark's stomach twisted as he grabbed a flashlight and approached cautiously. His hands trembled as he peeked through the peephole. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. A whisper. Low, chilling, barely audible. He waited for you. Mark's blood turned to ice. He yanked open the door, but the hallway was empty. Except for one thing. A single note, taped to the wall. Written in smeared, jagged letters. You don't deserve a second chance. Mark's fingers curled around the paper. His pulse hammering in his ears. He looked down at Leo, who pressed against his leg, shaking. He had tried to move on. But his past wasn't done with him yet. And he had the sinking feeling that soon he would come face to face with something far worse than regret. The note trembled in Mark's fingers as he read the words over and over again. You don't deserve a second chance. His heart pounded against his ribs. His breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The hallway was empty, but the silence around him felt wrong, as if someone was still watching from the shadows. Leo whimpered. His tiny body pressed against Mark's leg. Mark swallowed hard and shut the door, locking it with shaky fingers. He turned and leaned against the wood, his mind racing. Who was doing this to him? Samantha Reed. The name echoed in his head like a curse. She had loved Bruno. She had been there when he died. Had she come back for revenge? Had she been watching him all this time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Mark's stomach twisted. Well, this wasn't just revenge. This was something personal. And it wasn't over yet. The nightmares begin. That night Mark barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Bruno, alone, shivering in the rain. His ribs protruding. His once bright eyes clouded with pain. In the dream, Bruno lifted his head. His tail wagging weakly as if still hoping Mark would return. But Mark didn't move. His feet were rooted to the ground. His voice trapped in his throat. And then Bruno collapsed. The light in his eyes faded. His tail stilled. Mark screamed but no sound came out. Then, slowly, Bruno's lifeless body began to move. Not on its own. Something was dragging him away. Hands, dark, twisted, covered in mud, pulled Bruno into the shadows. And before the darkness swallowed him whole, Bruno's eyes snapped open. They were filled with something Mark had never seen before. Not love, not loyalty, but rage. Mark jolted awake, drenched in sweat. His chest heaved as he gasped for breath. Leo lay beside him, ears perked, staring at the door. Something was outside. The whisper in the dark. Mark hesitated, then slowly reached for the baseball bat beside his bed. His legs felt heavy as he crept toward the door. He pressed his ear against the wood. Silence. A whisper. Low, ragged, inhuman. He waited for you. Mark stumbled backward, his throat dry. Leo barked, his tiny body shaking. Mark's pulse hammered as he reached for his phone. His fingers barely able to type. He called the police. By the time they arrived, the hallway was empty. No notes, no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there at all. The officers gave him the usual speech. No evidence of forced entry. Could be a prank. Call us if it happens again. Mark barely heard them. Because as they turned to leave, one of the officers paused. His brow furrowed as he pointed to Mark's doorstep. Sir, is that mud? Mark's stomach dropped. A single muddy paw print stained the floor. Drowning in guilt. The next few days were hell. The scratching at the window continued. The whispers didn't stop. And the messages kept coming. You left him to die. He was a good boy. You don't deserve Leo. Mark felt himself unraveling. He barely ate. He barely slept. Every time he turned around, he expected to see Bruno's lifeless eyes staring back at him. Then one night his phone buzzed. Picture message. Mark hesitated before opening it. His breath caught in his throat. It was a photo of his bedroom, taken from the foot of his bed. His hands shook violently as he scanned the room. The closet, the corners, the window, nothing. But the message came seconds later. Check under the bed. Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. He gripped the bat, knelt down, and slowly lifted the bed skirt. A pair of eyes stared back at him. Mark screamed, scrambling backward. But the thing under the bed didn't move. Because it wasn't a person. It was Bruno's stuffed toy. The same one he had abandoned with him. The one that should have been buried with him. Buried secrets. Mark couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. He packed a bag, grabbed Leo, and drove without thinking. He needed answers. He needed to find Bruno's grave. Rain poured down as he pulled up to the old shelter grounds, his headlights illuminating the overgrown grass. But as he stepped out of the car, dread filled his chest. Bruno's grave was dug up again. The dirt was fresh. The hole was deep. Mark's hands trembled as he stepped closer. Something was buried there now. Small wooden box, with his name carved into the lid. Mark's breath came in shaky gasps as he reached down, his fingers gripping the damp wood. He lifted the lid. Inside, folded neatly, was a torn piece of fabric. Blanket. The same one he had left Bruno with. And beneath it, a single note, written in shaky, uneven letters. You can't run from this. Thunder rumbled overhead. The wind howled. Mark's stomach churned. He wasn't running anymore. He was going to find whoever was behind this. Because if he didn't, he knew he wouldn't survive what came next.